Hello, I'm Sean Lim, and welcome to After 10. Japan's moves to reinterpret its pacifist constitution to allow itself to engage in so-called collective self-defense has raised ire and concerns throughout the region. On today's After 10, we discuss the potential impact of a more militarized Japan. Stay with us. Well, Director Shin, thank you so much for joining us here on After 10.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So it looks like Japan wants to increase its militarization under this term of collective self-defense. For some of our viewers who may not be familiar, what does Japan's pacifist constitution say right now, and what are they trying to amend or reinterpret?
Article 9 of the Japanese pacifist constitution stipulates that Japan will renounce war potentials, and land, sea, and air forces will never be maintained under the constitutional law. However, the interpretation of the Japanese government has always argued that we have the collective self-defense right. However, we do not exercise the right to collective self-defense. That was the position of the predecessor. However, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo has made a certain political commitments in his election campaign that Japan will reinterpret Article 9 of the pacifist constitution, which allows the exercise of the right to collective self-defense.
So it already has the right to defend itself, so it keeps a minimal defense force, but this collective part means that it can be engaged in the defense of its allies. Can you tell us a little bit more of how far that implication would go?
Well, actually, the concept of collective self-defense has a twofold meaning. One is to defend the state itself collectively with others, which is literal meaning of the collective self-defense. The other is to defend others collectively, which is quite, a little bit awkward when it comes to the literal meaning of the collective self-defense.
So are they stretching this definition?
Yes, right, which has, aggressive aspects. So one of the interesting phenomenon in the discussion of the Japan's collective self-defense is that the latter one, to defend others collectively, has become more conspicuous than the former. To defend itself collectively with others.
What this essentially seems to mean is that if there's a conflict in a neighboring country, they will go in and help defend that neighboring country.
Yes,
Why
right.
does that raise concerns, though? It sounds like they're going to just help.
Especially in the Asian countries, which were the victims of the Japanese colonialism and imperialism. So it may create concerns over the, resurrection of the Japanese militarism and the imperialism again. So that's why the Asian countries which have been the victims of the Japanese militarism are so concerned about the expansion of military operation by Japan under the name of collective self-defense.
So there's mistrust in the region.
Yes, right.
And so for an example, if there is an emergency situation on the Korean peninsula, people are concerned that if Korea in a more vulnerable state does accept some so-called assistance from Japan, that Japan would come in and then take advantage of that situation and not just help, but help themselves to colonize again? Is that the big concern, the end game?
Well, I think it is kind of misunderstanding in that sense because, well, actually, United Nations Charter prevents any kind of, conquers or colonizations. So at the current stages, it is impossible for a state to colonize other states. However, as you know, well, people are really concerned about Japanese intervention in the Korean situations. So because of the legacy of the World War II period. So in order to, exercise the right to collective self-defense, there must be a prior consent from the victim states. So there is a certain safe belt in this regard.
But what is the Korean government's official position that marks its concern about this issue?
The official position was a kind of reiteration of the statement like this. Without prior consent from the South Korea, Japan may not exercise the right to collective self-defense on the Korean peninsula, even if there is a certain emergency situation. But South Korea has never officially opposed to the exercise of the collective self-defense by Japan. So it is kind of conditional, recognition of the right to collective self-defense by Japan.
Well, China is also concerned. And can you tell us about their position and how they view this move in terms of regional security?
There are, I think, two aspects when it comes to the Chinese positions. Well, actually, the advisory group's report made by Japan clearly indicates, well, Japan needs the right to collective self-defense in order to cope with, newly changed national security environment. One of the examples is which was indicated in the report was the rise of China. So that's why we may say that Japan's collective self-defense is targeted to China. So China is really concerned about this situation because the exercise of the collective self-defense may be a certain detrimental to the strategic stability in relations between the U.S. and China.
The United States seems to be in favor of Japan's move towards collective self-defense. How much of that is the United States wanting to unburden itself of some of the more the big role it has in maintaining security by having Japan step up and do more of the work, or is it really to also then counterbalance China's rising power in the region?
The two aspects are also well included in the U.S. intentions to welcome the Japanese position to the collective self-defense. For instance, well, U.S. wants a certain burden sharing, especially financial burden sharing with Japan in Northeast Asia. And another aspect is that, well, the report, the advisory group's report clearly mentions the scenario, one of the scenarios is dealing with missile defense system. So the recent approval of the proposal of the reinterpretation of the Constitution is clearly indicating that the confirmation of the Japan's participation in the U.S.-led missile defense system. So I think, well, in these regards, nothing to oppose from the United States side.
About 50% of the Japanese public is against this issue, but then that, of course, means about 50% is for it. What explains the internal division?
It's a little bit, awkward situation because, when before the Abe administration pushed it forward the collective self-defense, Abe administration is one of the strongest government which has received strong support from the public. But nevertheless, well, I think Abe administration strongly believed that he is the only prime minister who can achieve this kind of reinterpretation of the pacifist constitutions because of the strong support from the general public. However, this is a little bit, miscalculations in the domestic field. So nowadays he faced a lot of oppositions from the general public, so he may be a little bit embarrassed by that situation. That's why the cabinet decision set up new 3 conditions for the exercise of the right to collective self-defense, which is quite confined, with confined capacity in exercising the right.
In Japan, do you see people just averaging toward the middle, or do you see the average coming from strong polar opposites? Like on the one side, a lot of Japanese who want to be a little bit more apologetic about the past, and then on the other hand, some of the extreme right where they're not apologetic and they want to move forward with a more aggressive military stance in the region.
I think you pointed very interesting points because, Abe administration's ambition was to normalize the current status of Japan in international politics. But the thing is that, the reason why Japan was not normal state was not exercising of the right to collective self-defense. It is because that Japan has the legacy of militarism, and Japan has not made every effort to achieve historic reconciliation with Asian countries which were victims of its colonialism. So I think there are so many civil society members who are really concerned about this kind of situations. They always push forward that Abe administration has to make sincere apology to the war criminals as well as the aggressions. However, there are two extremes in the Japanese societies. But the real concern is that we cannot find any, balanced, civil societies which bridges to the two extremes at the moment. So this is much more important
What do you
aspects.
think that key is to that bridge? What kind of mentality is there besides the two?
Yes, there must be a certain, clear and objective analysis and diagnosis on the current situations, and then there needs a certain efforts to compromise the two extremes. But never have I heard such kind of voices from the Japanese civil societies to compromise these two extremes.
Well, Shinzo Abe is going abroad to apparently to sell his collective self-defense program to New Zealand and Australia. What is he hoping to gain from those talks, and what's in it for these two countries to support Japan?
The exercise of the collective self-defense by Japan may expand the areas of cooperation for its self-defense forces with Australia and New Zealand, because both countries are concerned about the rise of China in that region as well, and both are the allies with the United States. They are like-minded states, we can say like this. But the thing is that if you look at the newly established three conditions for the exercise of the collective self-defense in the recent, cabinet decisions, there is one interesting condition, which is that there must be a certain clear danger to the very existence of Japan's national security. However, the circumstances in the region where Australia or New Zealand belong to, I have doubt whether this circumstance may have clear danger aspects to the very existence of Japan's national security. So I think, Australia and New Zealand may have not great benefits from the exercise of Japanese collective self-defense.
Historical militarism, there are leaders in the past who don't really follow convention and they just go off and exercise whatever they would like to do, it would appear. So that's the big concern.
Yes,
is
right.
that do you have these rules, but in a situation where somebody doesn't follow them, is there much that we can do?
Yes, right. So especially in South China Sea, if Japan participates in a war situation or other combat situations in the region, it would change, as I already told you, it would change stability in relations between U.S. and China in the Southeast Asia. So that's why China is really concerned about the expansion of, military roles fundamentally in this region by Japan. However, as you know, Australia is the ally with U.S. and Japan is the ally with U.S. So I think, if there is cooperation between Australia and Japan, then U.S. will totally welcome this situation.
There's concerns that in the case of an emergency situation on the Korean Peninsula, that Japan would enter the country with their military forces, but from what I understand, that cannot happen unless there's explicit approval by the South Korean government. But in the case of, if we just look at the textbook history of the Korean War and where maybe South Korea was all the way confined to Busan at one point, and it looks like it could be overtaken by a China-North Korea contingent, wouldn't that count as a really explicit threat to Japan's sovereignty and security? And would they therefore just come in?
Definitely. So if you look at the newly established three conditions, it says, if there is attack on the countries with close relations, then Japan may be intervened in these situations, which hinted the Korean Peninsula emergency situation. So when we consider the North Korean factors, the exercise of the collective self-defense by Japan may provide a certain benefits to South Korea as well, as you mentioned, when we consider the Korean War situation. However, we propose that there is clear preconditions, that there must be a prior consent. But however, it is really textbook, statement, because in wartime, it is really difficult to exchange notes by way of the diplomatic channels. So sometimes, a state may presuppose a certain implied consent, even though there is no prior consent, express consent from South Korea. Japan may consider, there is a certain implied consent, and then dispatch the self-defense forces to Korean Peninsula. But however, we have to always think of the pre-stage of war and the after stage of the war. If Japan dispatched its forces under the pretext of the implied consent, this may be categorized as aggression after the war. So I think Japan cannot take any advantages from this kind of interventions. So we don't have to be so much worried about the situation.
There are still concerns that it will spark an arms race in the region. What are your thoughts on that?
So what is more important in the debate on the exercise of the right to collective self-defense in Japan is not the collective self-defense itself, but I think in the Japanese overall security policy. So if you read the advisory group's report, it deals with collective self-defense as well as collective security and gray zone incidents. So in that case, well, what I would like to say is that, well, people are concerned about the arms race in Northeast Asia. So, well, for a short period of time, I think it is inevitable. But the international politics always try to go towards the equilibrium in the longer period of time. So I firmly believe that it may apply to the North Korean situations, even though Japan can exercise the right to collective self-defense. So in this regard, I think, well, the arms race may not be detrimental to the stability in Northeast Asia in the longer period of time, because there may be a certain equilibriums. However, what we have to be concerned is that in Northeast Asia, Japan is also surrounded by three world powers such as United States, China, and Russia. So Japan has to be really careful about not to, shatter down the existing strategic, stability in this region.
What would that look like where Korea could be happy, Japan could be happy, China could be happy, United States could be happy, and then let's even throw in Russia?
In order to achieve Japan's purpose with regard to the right to collective self-defense, there must be a certain, sincere efforts to be conducive to the historic reconciliations between the Asian countries at first. This is the way to build up a certain trust and confidence among the states concerned. Japan has succeeded in building up this kind of trust only with the United States at the moment. So I think, well, in order to get rid of a certain concerns in the Asian countries, there needs more, confidence building.
All right, well, Director Shin, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Okay, thank you very much.
And that does it for us on After 10. Join us again next time. We'll see you soon. We will continue to do our best to improve our show based on the perspective of our viewers. Always feel free to leave us any comments, great ideas, or suggestions you wish to share with us.